Okay, hey, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today I have a really cool prototype preview guy for you guys from Nordic Marine Instruments. They're essentially an amalgam of the founder's native Danish culture and his passion for high-end everyday tool watches. NMI was created for those who have an affinity for design and proportions, as well as an appreciation for fine materials and craftsmanship. In terms of the type of watch, this is a dive watch, some key comm characteristics and design language you're looking for a diver. Of course, you're going to want water resistance, typically through some type of screw down crown. You're going to want something that's tough, legible, with a dive time bezel, and a diver's extension is always nice if on bracelets. This is their Østersøen Hembella, or bright blue prototype, and it's a diver that pays homage to the serene landscapes, rugged coastlines, and pristine waters of the Nordic region, particularly with its wave pattern dial. Now, these are going to go for $399 in terms of that early bird pricing, actually super early bird. Then the normal early bird pricing is actually going to be $449, and then, eventually it'll go up higher than that. This is a brand new brand. It's actually expected to launch on Kickstarter later in this month of August of 2023. So I was happy that they reached out and I was able to kind of get my hands on a sample for you guys, just to give you a little bit of background and really showcase some of the really finer aspects of this, because I think at face value you might feel like you've seen a watch like this before, but I will say it's in the details. So it is very versatile, yes, very balanced, very symmetrical, but there are some really nice ornate details that I was really impressed by. So with that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. Okay guys, so let's take a closer look. Check that out. So I think what a lot of you are going to be drawn into is going to be this dial that has a very subtle wave pattern. I mean, it's obviously not as high grade as something like a Grand Seiko, but you can see that it does add some really cool almost wrinkle texture there on the dial that does look like, it definitely is reminiscent of water. But for me, what really impresses here is going to be the handset and the dial furniture. Check out those lovely indices, multifaceted. The handset, my goodness, it is very, very reminiscent of my Grand Seiko GMT. Similar style handset, just fully beveled and loomed, little squared corners. My gosh, look at that. It even has the capped seconds hand there, so you don't just see the little pinion. So it looks very, very clean, very finished, right? Which I like. I like that it just has a very complete look to it. And, I can absolutely appreciate that very, very much. And that's just kind of at a glance, right? So let's go ahead and dive into some of the specs here. So 40 millimeter diameter, so 40 millimeters, which is a great sweet spot for a lot of folks. Very nice. You can see the profile there in terms of the bezel and the case. Beautiful beveling there. Let me give it a quick wipe so you guys can kind of get a fingerprint free look at those nice bevels. Check them out. Very nice and clean, besides my fingerprints, but very well executed. I like the shape here. It definitely is. It's nice that it has the upper bevel as well as the lower. It really helps slim down the visual weight. And some of you are, I'm showing you this profile, your eyes are taken here to this clasp. I will say clasp, very, very impressive. Something that we've seen from the brand RZE in the past, which, they're actually friends of this brand in Nordic Marine Instruments and NMI and RZE. So they are I don't know if they're stablemates or what you would consider them, but of course, within this kind of smaller micro brand world, a lot of the brands and owners are connected. So it only has a 12 millimeter thickness, which is quite nice. Of course, this is a dive watch. This isn't a super thin, low profile dress watch. It has a 48 millimeter lug to lug, so 40, 12, and 48. Those are really good numbers. 20 millimeter lug width. I mean, on paper, you hear something like that, and you know that immediately it's probably going to hit a lot of sweet spots on the wrist. You look at the construction, stainless steel, brushed and polished, majority brushed, and a really nice brush there. You can see, of course, the satin brush is at a tool watch level, not quite a luxury level of like kind of fine hairline brushing, but it still is really well executed, and you'll definitely see worse brush jobs here at much higher price points. So very nice and clean execution there. Getting to the crown, screw down crown, nicely signed. As you can see, actually really cool in terms of how well the logo lines up. And then we get to the bezel action. Really nice. Before I turn it, the grip on here is nice and well defined. I almost said sharp, but I don't want you to think it's sharp in a bad way. It just has a great tactile engagement. It's very easy to actuate, but not sloppy by any means. It's minimal back play. Great balance between clickiness and smoothness. And, you know, you do have to put in a bit of, so you're not going to do it by accident. You know, you're not going to turn it by accident. So you are going to have to apply a bit of force, but because of how well these grips are, this coin edge, how well it's executed, it does make it easier to use just because you can engage quite nice. And another nice thing is, as much as my fingerprints on the bevels are showing up, the nice thing is because of this brushed steel bezel insert, you're not seeing any smudging, which if this was a glossy ceramic insert, you absolutely would see that. So something to consider also with the dial, even though it is pushed to the outer edges in terms of you know, the timing scale and the indices, because you do have this nice bezel, it actually does shrink the watch quite a bit down visually, which is really nice in terms of its wear profile and being a bit more versatile. Now, inside of this nice thin watch is actually the Miyota 90S5, which doesn't have a date complication, which is great, which means you're not going to have a ghost position when you pull out the crown. That's not a huge pet peeve for me, but it can be for many others. It has a 42-hour power reserve, beats at 4 hertz or 800 vibrations per hour in terms of its beat rate. The case back is solid and etched, as you can see, just nicely executed. And it also does contribute to that thinness. I'm sure if they put a display back, it would have added a bit of heft there. And then we get to the dial, which is kind of where we started, guys. To recap, you're getting applied indices, you're getting this wave textured dial, polished and faceted hands, which are just fantastic. I would say they are the low-key highlight of this watch. Then you're getting BGW9 Super Luminova, so very nice and white and crisp in terms of the daylight legibility. And then it will be that nice cool blue, which might not be as bright at initial darkness, but it will definitely last very nice and very long in terms of throughout darkness over time. The water resistance here is 20 atmospheres or 200 meters, which is great for a dive watch. It's really kind of the standard dive watch depth. Getting into this bracelet, 20 millimeter lugs, solid 3-link bracelet, tapering to about 16 millimeters, all brushed, even on the sides. Then we get to this clasp, which is a work of art. Milled push button clasp with 5-position toolless micro adjustment a la RZE. So very, very cool. Check that out. Of course, on an RZE, it's typically going to be matted out with some hard coating. It's really nice to see this here because you're getting the milled section. You're getting really nice buttons there, great size. And then, of course, a really nice functional piece there. Sure, you do have to take it off, you know, to extend it, but you can ratchet it back in, which is nice in terms of getting that really correct sizing based on your wrist and how it might swell throughout the day. You can see on this nicely signed clasp also that the brushing is very, again, quite impressive. And then of course, if I can wipe off some of the fingerprints on the bevels, let's just take a closer look. Check that out. Really nice. Again, this is a prototype, so it's made the rounds a bit here and there, but it is quite impressive. Really nice. So with all that said, guys, let's actually get this on the wrist and see how it wears. Okay, guys, as you can see on my 7.5-inch wrist, this fits just masterfully. Beautiful lay there in terms of how it presents on the wrist. Great compartmentalization in terms of the thickness and the thinness, at least the perceived thinness. It's already a relatively thin watch at 12 millimeters for a diver, but what you also have is those bevels working for you in terms of having that upper and lower bevel. Very reminiscent of, let's say, the SPB 14362 MAS recreation from that side, where you just do get some nice effects to thin out the side of the case. And then of course you do get that little section before the grip on the bezel, which also again creates that separation of visual space, which is going to make this appear even flatter. And you can see really nice. I'm really impressed by this brushing, guys. Very fine, definitely a higher level than you would typically see at the under $500. You know, it's something that there are grades to things and levels, and a lot of times folks maybe don't care about that within this price point, but I think it is cool for a new brand to come along and do certain things. You see like the cap there on the hand stack, the level of beveling. Of course, if I do have my wrist a bit too close to the camera, you're going to get some perspective distortion. So what I'll do is I'll leave my wrist nice and low here and just kind of bring the frame in, and you can get a bit more of a detailed look while still keeping a truer aspect ratio. You can see this sits nicely centered on my larger 7.5-inch wrist, which it is large, yes, but it's also quite round, so it's not like I have this wide flat wrist. That's very accommodating for larger watches. I think you know, I definitely struggle with a lot of the same fitment issues many of my viewers do, even with smaller wrists. So I gotta say that this just works for me. I think it's a very, very nice look, a very nice wear. Check out the flatness there. I love how everything flows from the end link all the way down to the clasp. It all just fits, and I dig that. You don't always find that, especially not in kind of an initial outing for a new brand. So very, very impressive. So with all that said, let's actually get this piece off wrist, set up for some loom shots, low light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. Hey, as you can see, this is a dive watch. Very nice, bright blue loom. That handset is really quite supercharged. And again, this is a pre-production prototype, so I'm sure they will make refinements as they go. But I gotta say, yeah, just face value here, very nice. Even in a bit of the ambient light that's left in the room right now, I can see that pale bright blue dial, which again, interestingly, is quite glossy. Typically when you have something with more of a texture to it, it's done in a matted finish. So kudos to Nordic Marine for doing something a bit different, and we'll see how that plays here in this lighting, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, or just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So whether you're spending time in your favorite automobile or not, you're going to see this in mixed lighting conditions, to include some maybe high contrast lighting that could expose any types of you know, production defects. But all you're going to see here is a very nice uniform gliding of the light right over the brushing on the links. Beautiful. And then of course playing with that bezel insert very nicely. And let's focus on the dial. Oh, look at those indices. Just wow. Look at the way they light up. Look at the 11 o'clock marker as the light drapes over it. It's just, they just catch in so many fun and interesting ways. So even when the loom isn't in full effect, right, you're still going to have a nice amount of legibility. If you're worried about the kind of blue on blue, check that out. The loom is a little bit engaged. The dial is a little bit visible, still quite good because of the 3D nature and how tall they are. Those facets are going to catch darkness and reflect it back and give you a nice amount of contrast and legibility. The hands are just impressive, guys. Wow. Very, very nice. This dial, here we go, is a pretty good angle on it, guys. You can see there, very different, you know, as to a lot of the executions we've seen that will have waves. Again, those types of dials typically will be on another end of the spectrum. Either they're going to be very just artistic and not really a, you know, more of a drawing of a wave, or they're going to be very hyper kind of realistic on the Grand Seiko side, let's say, versus the Omega side, right? They're just very two different wave dials. This is somewhere in the middle, where you're getting a bit of that kind of realistic 3D effect, while having a bit of a cleaner, kind of more polished profile to the eye, a little bit more of an industrial feel, versus kind of that at one with nature. So very cool, very different, guys. Again, it's so hard to stand out within this marketplace, within this price point, within this you know, particular segment of micro brand divers. So when a brand does come around and, you know, does something a little bit different and still has all of those other hallmarks that you look for in terms of, hey, anti-reflective sapphire crystal, nice bezel action, toolless micro adjust clasp, everything solid, you know, it's important. So it's nice to see that, and I have to say, very impressed. So closing thoughts, guys, on the wrist, really classic proportions with a clean and balanced layout. Definitely check for updates in terms of model variations. This is, you know, I'm recording this a little bit before they release, and, you know, it's been limited in terms of the information that's we're able to find online for these pieces, in terms of some of the variations and everything like that. So but we move into something like comparable models. There's definitely a lot of competition at the 500 and under diver price point, but this diver does feel like it brings something new to the table. So, you know, it's hard to argue with. And although, you know, the normal early bird is going to be $449, that super early bird at $399 I think is very, very competitive, especially considering you don't know anything about the brand. And I could easily see, once you do know something about the brand, their normal retail price, you know, being closer to 500 or over, maybe up to 6 or 7, depending on how many units and how much traction they're able to gain from this Kickstarter. So guys, for me, the bottom line, this is really well executed, thoughtfully designed, and just a very, very solid value. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you like the video, please do a like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.